Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench, where we talk about math, science, history, and trains, and do it all with some very fun activities. I'm Bob Wetzenberger, Mr. Bob, Education Director for the National Railroad Museum. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, want to type in a question, feel free to do so. We'll answer those right after the segment. If you just want to type in and let us know who you are and where you're watching from, we'd love to hear from you. Also, make sure that you like the National Railroad Museum's Facebook page. Well, this afternoon, history here on Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench. We're going to take another mini tour of a piece in the National Railroad Museum's collection. Today, the Pennsylvania Railroad Gb1. The Pennsylvania Railroad, along with other lines working in and out of New York City, needed to electrify their tracks. The Pennsylvania Railroad did so from New York City down to Washington, D.C. and west to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. The Pennsy had a series of electric locomotives to pull their trains in and out of New York, and starting in the early 1930s, they began construction of one of probably the more famous locomotives and electric locomotives here in our country, and that was the Gb1. The Pennsy eventually built 137 of them. They built them at their shops in Altoona, Pennsylvania. Now, the Gb1 and just that nomenclature is something that we often get asked about at the museum. Well, to understand, we actually have to go back to steam time. To describe a steam locomotive, well, there really isn't a way that you can describe one. It's not like a car model where you drive X model of car or such and so truck, because all steam locomotives were custom designed. Well, a railroad superintendent, Methlin White, came up with the idea of counting the wheels on a steam locomotive. And what he said is, if we count up the wheels, we can come up with a nomenclature that everyone will understand. In the case here, we have a 460, meaning that we have 4 wheels on our pilot truck, 6 driving wheels, and no trailing wheels supporting the cab. Well, the Pennsylvania Railroad considered themselves the standard railroad of the world. They were there to set the standard for everyone else, and they followed this nomenclature, but they took it one step further. To streamline it, instead of using the numbers 460 or 440 or whatever the combination would be, the Pennsylvania Railroad assigned each one of these classifications a letter. So the letter G in Pennsylvania Railroad nomenclature stood for a 460 locomotive. So in the case of the Gb1, imagine this. We have 2 460 or G-class locomotives back to back, 4 pilot wheels, 6 driving wheels, 6 driving wheels, 4 pilot wheels, and that is how we get the name Gb1, the 1 standing for the first incarnation, first specification of the particular locomotive. And you can see on the Gb1, going from either end, 4 pilot wheels, 6 driving wheels, 6 driving wheels, and then 4 more pilot wheels. So that's how we get Gb1 for this particular locomotive's name. Now, one of the other more famous things about the Gb1 is that the body was designed by Raymond Loewy, an industrial designer here in the United States. Mr. Loewy did not actually create the original shape of the Gb1, but he perfected the body and added the paint scheme that we know today and recognize on the Gb1. Loewy did not only work on the Gb1, but on a number of other locomotives for the Pennsylvania Railroad. You see here the T1, a locomotive that Loewy lent his design talents to streamline. Loewy did work for other manufacturers and railroads. For the Fairbanks Morse Company, he did the body design for their Erie-built diesel locomotives. He also designed the famous tri-green color scheme for the North Pacific's North Coast Limited and their other top passenger trains. Now, speaking of color, during the time that the Gb1s were in use, which was up until the 1980s, The locomotive carried no less than 12 different paint schemes along with a number of different variations, and you see them scrolling by here on the screen. The interesting thing to note about the paint schemes is that there are some that are fancier, more complicated than others, some that are lesser, reserved, more conservative. Well, depending upon the financial status of the railroad at the time, well, that's going to depend on the degree of fanciness, if you will, or sophistication for the paint scheme. Those that are lesser, if you will, single color, maybe not much lettering along with them, probably are going to have done during more reserved or more tighter financial times, whereas the more lavish, more colorful schemes would have been during times when the checkbook was a little bit fuller. The GG1s were around long enough that one of the color schemes they bore was a commemorative for the United States bicentennial in 1976, and probably one of the more colorful schemes that was worn by this locomotive. So a little bit about the Pennsylvania Railroad GG1. There are 16 GG1s left today. Of course, one of them right at the National Railroad Museum. Now, if you'd like to explore the GG1 a little bit more, of course, stop by the museum. If you'd like to have a little bit of the GG1 at home with you, stop by our website, nationalrrmuseum.org. A couple of places to look. If you stop in the Shop tab, scroll down and look at some of the artwork and puzzles that are available. Example here, we have a puzzle of the GG1s actually bringing passengers to the annual Army-Navy game in Philadelphia. Also, at least 3 of our annual membership prints feature the Pennsylvania Railroad GG1. Also, if you go over to the Education tab on our website, scroll down to the Activity Zone, look for Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench, and there is an activity sheet that you can download involving the Pennsylvania Railroad GG1. You know, the National Railroad Museum inspires lifelong learning by providing dynamic educational opportunities through the preservation of railroad objects, engaging exhibits, and innovative programs. As a nonprofit educational institution, we are supported by both public and private donations and our museum members. For more information on how you can support the National Railroad Museum or become a museum member, please visit our website, nationalrrmuseum.org. And of course, thank you so much for all of your continued support. Hey, I'm Mr. Bob. Thanks for stopping by Mr. Bob's Railroad Workbench, and we hope to see you here again very soon.